Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone that has come out today. In the over 172 years of the state of California, I'm the only Hindu to ever serve in the California Legislature, so I know there's a lot of eyes and ears on me, and this has definitely not been easy for any of us, including the chair and his staff and the author and everyone that's worked really hard to try to listen to everyone and do their best to represent their communities and the state of California. I know a couple of questions to raise. I just want the opportunity for either the author or the witnesses for the author, the opportunity to kind of describe to us why there was a suggestion that we can just use inherited social status as to why that is not acceptable versus using caste.
Definitely. Okay. The word caste is incredibly important to utilize here, primarily because this is the system of discrimination that we want to fight against. It is just as important as using the word gender or race or age or anything like that. That is why it is incredibly important to use the word caste and its definition.
And there was mention of the motion with the amendments that I believe the amendments move caste into under the ancestry category, and based upon the feedback I've gotten from folks generally, I think there'll be some folks probably on both sides that aren't too happy with that resolution. And sometimes when making legislation, when both sides aren't exactly happy, it's sometimes the landing place that we end up at. To try to understand that at the end of the day, it's not a perfect process, but it's a process where we're trying to seek justice. Faith is a very communal thing, but it's also very personal. I grew up Hindu and read the Gita. I have spent my entire adult life serving the community based upon what I learned and what was taught to me and my family. So it is very personal to me to think about, and it's sad to see so much division in my community and in our California community over something that is very personal to everyone that spoke here today. I get that, whether you're for or against, it's something meaningful to you for a reason personal to you. But ultimately, there are certain things that we must do, I think, as a state to protect everyone in our state. Now, understanding that there is legitimate legal questions that are likely going to be answered in the court system. I've passed a lot of legislation, the Racial Justice Act, and go on and on, that I believed in, that is being currently challenged in the legal system. Whether it's definitions, whether it's the reach or scope of the legislation, and I believe that's the appropriate place for a lot of those questions to be heard. I think the amendments as offered by the chair offer a very reasonable resolution to this. I do think that the author did take, even when I've spoken to opposition, the author's taken 95% of the suggested amendments short of removing the word caste. And I understand, I'm not naive, I understand that it's very clear that the opposition wants that word removed. But short of that, I think everything that has been done has accommodated many of the concerns that have been raised, even concerns that I had in terms of descriptions, what have you, things that I've talked with the author about, with the other legislators about. But ultimately, it comes down to ensuring that we're doing everything we can to protect everyone in our state. And if this falls short of that, as the opposition believes, then that's going to be determined by the courts to tell us, no, California, you got it wrong. I don't think we got it wrong. I do think that ultimately we want to make sure that everyone's protected. Now, that being said, I do agree that there should not be any groups that are targeted in any law. Whether it's Hindus, whether it's South Asians, there should be no law that specifically targets one group over the other. And so as this legislation moves forward, I think all of us should kind of ensure that it's being put forward as intended, not as targeting any one group. And if it's shown, if otherwise is shown, then it will be up to the courts to either interpret or for us to act accordingly moving forward. But from where this legislation began to where it is now, I certainly think it's a much improved piece of legislation, thanks to the work of the author and so many legislators, including the committee that have engaged on this. And so, I just wanted to, you can probably tell I'm very emotional. I wanted to speak on this because it's not easy for me. This is my community that I'm seeing, tear each other apart in social media and online, getting a lot of hate from both sides, a lot of love from both sides, whatever it might be. But what I have heard from both sides is a commitment to healing. And I want to see and take up, and those shaking their head no can shake their heads no. What I'm saying is I've heard from both sides that regardless of what happens, there will have to be at some point some commitment to healing. And if folks were sincere before this bill was heard about that, I hope they're sincere after this bill is heard about healing the community. And I'm certainly committed to do what I can to be a part of that if folks want me to be part of that. Otherwise, the reality is that we have to figure out a way to live with one another, to love one another. And I understand that these legal issues can be very complex, especially in the workplace. We have a lot of other classifications that make it very complicated to be an HR director in this state and in this country. I'm sure some folks on the other side of the aisle would agree. There's a lot of things that make it fairly complicated. And we have to work through those things. And it's hard to work through those things. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't do that difficult work. And so I really do appreciate everyone that came out today, regardless of what position you take on the legislation. Again, I want to thank the chair and the committee. I do think the amendments make it a better piece of legislation, including the amendments that the author took prior to this committee hearing and removing some of the language that was deemed offensive by some of those in the opposition. And so, with that, I'll be supporting the bill today, but hope that at some point in the future, hopefully sooner rather than later, there can be some work on peace and reconciliation.